Hi, my name is Judie VanKooiman, and you're watching Life Issues. This month's show is Paying It Forward, and my guest is Rich Boyajian. Welcome, Rich.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you for coming. And Rich, what is your title, and what hospital do you work at?
My title is I'm a nurse practitioner, and I am, the other title I have is the director of the virtual PSA Monitoring program. But I'm currently a nurse practitioner in genitourinary oncology in the radiation field for the Dana-Farber Brigham and Women's Cancer Center.
Wow, very interesting title, and I'm sure a very rewarding job.
I love what I do. I truly do.
That's good. Good. That's important. And what type of training did you have to go through to be that?
So I first went to, I went to my undergraduate at Fitchburg State College, which is now Fitchburg State University, and received a bachelor's degree in nursing. So, and I graduated as an RN. And then later on, in probably, I think it was about 8 years later, I began and took a master's degree courses, basically graduate school, and to become a nurse practitioner. Mm-hmm. So it was a long journey, but it was well worth it. It got me to where I wanted to be.
Good, good. That's very good. And why did you want to be a nurse?
So when I was younger, I was a business major for 2 years, and I came to realize in my sophomore year that I didn't want to sit behind a desk, and I had people, when I was in high school, I developed osteomyelitis, which is a bone infection, and the nurses were the ones that cared for me while I was going through that and almost lost my foot. And my mother's a nurse, so I knew what it was, and I always liked it because there's a lot of personal interaction and things like that. And so that's when I transferred into that. And then what really made me decide to be an oncology nurse practitioner is kind of is a long and interesting story, but basically my life and my whole family's life changed in 1996. I think we've talked, but in 1995 I married my college sweetheart, Pauline McLaughlin, who's now Pauline Boyajian, and we lived down in Pembroke, Massachusetts. We had built a house. It was great, and I worked a lot as a nurse and made pretty good money, but I got married in August of 95, and August 2nd of 1996, I was at a patient's house. At the time, I was a home care nurse and taking care of a quadriplegic patient, doing his care, which can be quite detailed and involved, and they're helpless. So I went earlier that morning to my primary care, my first time I ever met him, telling him I had had symptoms for probably 8 months that I was ignoring, because as a good nurse does, is just plays it off to something else. But what drove me to go to the doctor was I was playing in a hockey tournament down in Marlborough, and I felt like I was going to have a heart attack because I was so tired and so weak and couldn't catch my breath. So I finally went in, and he said, "You look good," drew my blood, and and scheduled me for kind of a upper GI test. And so I went on my way, and they were going to let me know on the results. So here I am at my first patient, the quadriplegic. He's halfway through the care, and I get a page to a number that I really didn't know. So I called the number back. I asked to be excused, and the home health aide was there with them. I go out in the hallway to call, and I call, and it's the doctor that I had just seen about an hour and a half ago. And he said, I said, "Hi, this is Rich Boyajian, returning a page from Dr. Wu, I think." And the phone kind of went silent. The woman in the office was, oh, hold on, Dr. Wu needs to speak to you. And kind of, it was just a quiet voice, so I was like, And then he got on the phone and he said, "Richard, I normally don't do this, but your blood work shows that your white count's elevated. And I said, well, how high? And he said, 395,000. And I said, so I have leukemia? And he said, yes. And he said, normally I would have had you come into the office, but I talked to the hematologist, and they want you to go immediately to the Brigham and Women's emergency room because the type of cancer I had, chronic myelogenous leukemia, with so many cells in my body in the bloodstream, they were worried I would have a stroke. Mm. So I get that news, and I said, okay, and kind of hung up, and, tearing up, and I walked back in, I probably had another half hour of care I had to do, didn't leave, but I feel bad because to this day the guy probably has no idea why I was had my eyes all welled up and everything. And then I got in the car and drove to the Brigham and Women's emergency room.
And then what was the next step after you received that news after going to the emergency room?
Honestly, a lot of it, I actually my wife had to tell me what happened at the emergency room, but basically, because I kind of probably understandably blocked this out. And but when I originally got there, because my cell count was so high, they thought I was in what's called the accelerated phase or blast crisis of CML. So they basically told me that there was really nothing they could do, but they could keep me comfortable. And I got last rites, and they did a bone marrow biopsy to confirm the diagnosis. They were pretty sure from the blood work, but you always need a bone marrow biopsy. So thankfully they did the bone marrow biopsy, because it turned out that even though I had a lot of cells in my bloodstream, it turned out I was actually in the beginning phases, in chronic phase of CML, and there was treatment options. So and that was quite devastating to go from you can be kept comfortable to there's a shot. But
so all kinds of things I'm sure were going through your mind.
Yeah, I mean, I was just I kind of it was just almost surreal to be there and being told you're going to die really soon, and then the good news, there's treatment options. And my poor wife, because to back up a little bit, so I got diagnosed August 2nd of 1996. So we're in the ER and everything. And my poor wife is in there with me and hearing all this. And then the great news at the time, I didn't think it was really that great a news, but there were treatment options, and the treatment option was an allogeneic bone marrow transplant. And an allogeneic transplant is basically where there's two types of transplant. One is an allogeneic, which is where you receive a donor's stem cells, and an auto means they'll take your own stem cells. And the allogeneic transplant is the most dangerous type of transplant, and probably the most aggressive type of cancer treatment you can get. And I knew what it was vaguely, because I had taken care of people at home who had had them, and these were the sickest of the sick people, and getting IV infusions of all kinds of things, and and basically I didn't want to do it. I was kind of because they told me that 1 in 4 people die in the first 100 days as a result of the treatment, not of the cancer, but as a result of the treatment. But at 28 years old, that was my only shot at living a long time. The other treatments would have held it for a couple of years, and it would eventually have killed me. And so I looked for anything I could do I looked into non-toxic treatments and things like that, and finally I realized that this is really the only proven method. And so I signed that consent, and we embarked on the journey, which the original part is where they type your family. And I only have one brother, and he didn't match, which for me, I was actually glad he didn't match, because I didn't want him to feel like a failure if I ended up dying of this, because there was a 25% chance I'd be dead. And so they went into the bone marrow registry, where, people that donate their, now it's just a cheek swab. Back then you had to have blood drawn, but they test your human leukocyte antigens, HLA testing. And it's basically how they match you to see if find a person who has very similar immune function as you. Because the biggest problem with an allogeneic transplant is something called graft versus host disease, which is basically when people have an autoimmune disease, their immune system's attacking themselves. When you have an allogeneic transplant, that donor immune system can attack you. And that actually kills a lot of people. And so, lo and behold, amazingly, I'm an Irish Armenian guy, and I matched a Southern Baptist from Texas, which, hey, it's,
whatever works.
Yeah, and so, my donor was in the Army at the time, and he donated at Bethesda, where back then when they did the bone marrow transplant, what they had to do to poor James was they had to bore basically 100 holes in his pelvis and suck the marrow out of it. So that was a lot harder than when I got his marrow. But so, he donated. It basically, 1996 was not a good year for the Boyajians. It was, so I got diagnosed August 2nd. 20, let me see, it was 12 days later, my brother-in-law, Pauline's brother, Dennis, who was her older brother, died of a seizure, had a seizure that stopped his heart. So here I am, we're dealing with this. My poor wife, her brother, who was one of the reasons she went into special education and everything, he just dies, and, it was, and her parents said, test his marrow for me, which was, amazing. But she had to deal with that. And then I matched James, so they told me they're going to do the transplant in December, because we knew if you do a transplant earlier, it's closer to diagnosis, there's better outcomes. But so back in the day, back then, because again it was 22 years ago, because I was going to get someone else's cells, they worried about if the graft would take, meaning the cells would take, or they would just die off. And because of that, what they do is they collected my leukemic stem cells in advance so they could at least give it back to me to keep me alive. So I'm on a machine being hooked up, and I couldn't really do anything. I'm getting my pheresed, and my poor wife is there. And we hadn't told anyone at the time. My wife, we found out she was 1 month pregnant, and unfortunately, she miscarried right there while I couldn't do anything. So my poor wife had to deal with that on her own while she's trying to process her husband could be dead in the next month, that he could be dead, and her poor brother died just, a few months earlier. It was horrible, and it was a lot tougher on my wife. She's kind of the strongest person I know, because going through that was just, and dealing with me, because I was emotionally a wreck. I mean, I could understand all this, and I kind of processed it all, but emotionally, it was just overwhelming kind of trauma, I guess you'd say. Right, yeah. But thankfully, one of the best things I did was realize I wasn't equipped to deal with this myself, and I saw a psychiatrist, Dr. Grace Chang, who was phenomenal and helped me to kind of process and learn to cope with all of this stuff, and basically what I did is I got admitted on December 5th of 1996. I then had, I underwent high-dose chemotherapy, which high doses of Cytoxin, where Dr. Anton would joke with me. He was a transplant physician, and said, we're going to bring you kind of to the brink and then bring you back. And because this chemo is so high, it destroys all your bone marrow. And then I had total body radiation to destroy any leukemic cells in my bone marrow, and to destroy all my cells. And then basically on Friday the 13th of December, 1996, I received an infusion of James Bacon's bone marrow, and and that started my journey to recovery, if you will. And and I think it's, and it changed my life. A lot of cancer survivors will tell you, some have a very difficult time afterwards. Others, turn it's a positive, post-traumatic, positive outcome, choosing to make a positive out of a tough situation,
Exactly.
and that's kind of what it did for me.
Yeah, it's great. Good. And you and your wife have 2 daughters. Would you please tell us about them?
So first I have to say I thank God every day for Mary Lou Hackett. She's the social worker that she met me probably the first day I got diagnosed and was with me all through the transplant and after. And she's the one that convinced me at the time, because I was 28 years old and I was just thinking I'm going to be dead soon if I good chance. She was trying to convince me, and she just kept at it that I should bank sperm because you never know, I might want children after this and stuff. And I was like, at the time, I could care less about kids right now. I just want to live. But she convinced me. I left a sample, and then about a year and a half after, a little over a year after the transplant, my wife and I, discussed that, she really wanted to have kids. I was kind of still worried because I knew there was a good chance I might not be here. But I saw how profoundly it affected her with all of her friends having children and her having the miscarriage and everything, that I said, all right, let's try it. So we went to the in vitro fertilization clinic at the Brigham, and they were great. And one of the things that my wife wasn't happy with, but it was the director of the clinic at the time. He's not there now, but he made me write a letter of why we should be allowed to have children. And that sounds really horrible, and my wife was not happy about that. But what he was trying to do is get me to think about, as I said, there's a good chance I could be, very ill or dead, and my wife would have to raise them on their own. So, it wasn't the easiest thing to do, but I wrote a letter about it, and we went through, my wife went through all of I didn't really have to do anything because my sperm was already, in a freezer, and I was sterile from that. And so my wife went through the hormone injections and everything, and on our first cycle, we were blessed, in August of 1998, my daughter Crystal Rich Boyajian was born, and that was just a miracle for everyone. And we decided we wanted to have another one. I don't remember the exact timing, but what happened was we had another cycle. They implanted embryos, and then what they do is if they're still good embryos after the harvest, they will freeze them, to maybe thaw out and implant if. So basically, the second cycle, unfortunately, didn't work. So we decided to do a third cycle, but this was instead of going through a harvest where they harvest the eggs, they implanted the frozen embryos, so from the first 2 cycles. And our second daughter was born, in 2001, and so February 16th of 2001. And she likes to tell the story, especially when she was younger, that she's really actually, she's 18 now, she's really actually 20 now because she was frozen for 2 years and they just had to wait for her. So,
Okay.
But I mean, thank God for Mary Lou Hackett, and because our girls are kind of our life, and and it was an amazing to go through this, because my wife had to do a lot of this. I was still recovering from a lot of stuff. I had complications. I had graft versus host disease. I had cardiomyopathy, all these fun things that you can get with, and had to be hospitalized probably 4 or 5 times in the first year after the transplant, and required transfusions for almost 2 years because my cells weren't producing. But again, I was alive, and I had a second chance, So I mean, it was incredible, it was, and that's actually what made me what I am today, as far as because I'm an oncology nurse practitioner. I did a lot of nursing. I've done a lot of different nursing, and I'd be happy to tell you about in a minute. But I had never seen such professional nurses, and I had been supervisor and everything else. I had my own company, but these nurses were brilliant as far as they knew everything about cancer treatment, and and the doctors really respected them. They listened to them. And the other thing though was they were not only experts, they were always took the time to deal with my emotional, because I was a basket case. It was just so hard to feel out of control.
Right.
And their ability to kind of and empathy was just what. And so I was kind of, when I got better, I was kind of a crazy patient and said, I want to work here at Dana-Farber and the Brigham. And I wanted originally I was thinking, well, maybe they'll hire me as an RN, but again, I had 6 or 7 years experience doing other stuff. They don't hire you unless you have experience. So I figured, all right, how can I do this? I always wanted to be, I kind of wanted to be a nurse practitioner because I wanted more say in the care. So I found the University of Massachusetts, a graduate school in nursing in Worcester. They had a NP program there that had a subspecialty in cancer prevention and control. So here I am driving from Pembroke, Massachusetts, multiple days a week to Worcester. Plus I was working 3 jobs at the time. I had, I laugh because I keep forgetting about this until I talk about it. But so I drove all that. I worked what's called a Baylor shift on the weekends, which is basically working 2 16-hour shifts and getting paid for a full time as a nursing home supervisor. I did that, plus I was also a research coordinator at the Dana-Farber, and I did some per diem work with some other things. So I was doing all that while my wife took care of 2 daughters, and at the time my special needs uncle, Joseph, who I grew up with, was living with us too. So my wife is amazing, and she kept it all together, because I was pretty useless between working like that and studying and everything else. I mean, it was, but that was, it was kind of like, for the first time I felt like that's what I want to do. And I had goals that, nursing before was, this is, it's a great opportunity and I get to interact with people, but this was kind of like, this is what I want to do the rest of my life. And I can remember going in my interview with Dr. Mary Kay Alexander. She was the vice dean at there, and she did the interview, and I basically came out. I said, I want to do this. This is what I want to do. This is my background, and I want to make a difference with, with people. And I'm still, Mary Kay is retired now, but I keep in touch with her all the time. And, it was great, because in graduate school, I finally actually got good grades. I actually graduated with the highest grade point average and got an award for that, which was, which for me was a big deal, because I never was much of a student in high school, and and I was good. I was in college. I did okay, but I wasn't, So I graduated from there. And
Rich, can you please tell us about the virtual PSA monitoring that you created?
Sure. So currently, as I told you, I'm working at the Dana-Farber Brigham and Women's in radiation oncology, and a lot of what I was doing, I started there in 2013, but what I started really taking care of a large number of prostate cancer patients. And with prostate cancer, the good thing about prostate cancer is it's very curable. But the problem is it's very curable, but you need, like any cancer, after you're treated and there's no you have to still follow people to make sure that they haven't relapsed. And prostate cancer can relapse 10 or 15 years later. So what happens is, as you treat people, more and more people need follow-up. So you've got, and I began to notice, like, the docs are spending the majority of their time looking at their PSAs and managing their symptoms, and the new patients aren't being able to get in. So what I said, there's got to be a better way, and I applied for a care redesign grant at the Brigham, and I got $50,000 a year for a couple of years, and I built some software, kind of practice management software, that what it does is it communicates with the patient, tells them that they need to get their PSA done at the designated lab. And then what the software does is it analyzes the PSA result, and it knows whether it's relapse or not, and it analyzes the symptom levels, and it spits out scores and whatnot. And basically, what we were able to do was the goal of this was to hopefully keep people out of the hospital that didn't need to be there, because one of the big things people are excited about is they don't have to travel into Boston. Because getting into the Longwood medical area is painful.
I've done that. Yes.
And so basically, we were surprised though, because 92% of the guys in our pilot said, "Yeah, we'll do this. We don't want to come in." And the docs were a little bit like, "Wow." And but long and the short is, we just looked at our 2-year statistics, and we've been able to reduce in-person follow-up visits by 30%. And we've increased consults by 30%, which means we've increased access to care by 30%. And that actually allowed us to treat 20% more patients than we were before, because of just freeing these people up. So, it's been terrific. And now I'm in the process right now of building a second version of this software that hopefully we can commercialize, because this will benefit so many other people.
Great. Awesome. And Rich, if anyone would like more information about anything that we've talked about tonight, can you please give us your contact info?
Oh, sure. So I honestly, I tell people they call my cell phone directly. It's 617-823-0559, or you can email me at work, which is it's Boyajian, my last name, RBOYAJIAN @partners.org. And if anyone has any questions about cancer, or if newly diagnosed people, I do this a lot, and that's probably my favorite thing to do, is to help newly diagnosed people, because I remember what it was like.
Right.
I help them get connected with treatment.
Exactly. And I'm sorry, but that's all the time that we have. Thank you for all you do to help those in need.
No,
Rich.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to tell my story.
That's awesome. I'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions. Please send them to lifeissuestv@gmail.com. And remember, live each day to the fullest and celebrate life.